Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Antony Oliver, and today's podcast is a bit different. In short, due to various reasons, you just have me. But that's fine, as it's a great opportunity to have a quick catch-up post-general election and gaze into the crystal ball to see what the new and very shiny Starmer government has in store for infrastructure as we head towards the King's Speech and opening of a new parliamentary session this Wednesday. But also, and without getting unnecessarily nostalgic, it's a great moment to point out and to mark the fact that it's 30 years this week since, having sat and passed my professional exams to become a chartered civil engineer, I packed my bags from Sir Owen Williams and Partners and made the bold decision to join New Civil Engineer magazine and start a new career in journalism. Quite a bit of water under the bridge since then. But a quick shout out to my old colleague and buddy Diarmaid Fleming, who reminded me of this milestone. Diarmaid and I joined NC on the same day from similar backgrounds, he being a member of the Institute of Engineers Ireland. And we were famously both late for our first Monday morning news meeting with then editor Mike Winney, having both failed to appreciate the vagaries of the Docklands Light Railway, which back in pre-Jubilee Line extension days of 1994 was the only way to get to our Heron Quay office in the East London Docklands. Now Diarmaid is busy breaking news for Al Jazeera in Qatar, and I'm pleased to say he's still channeling his inner Mike Winney and getting ridiculously excited whenever an infrastructure story hits the headlines. Well, all of that brings me to last week's landslide sweep to power by Labour, which of course was reminiscent of the 1997 win under Tony Blair, and that prompted an unprecedented renaissance in infrastructure spending, urged on by the fledgling private finance initiative and underpinned by a large dollops of public spending and public debt. They were heady times that saw huge changes in the UK approach to public transport, to energy policy and to investment in schools, hospitals, prisons and in national and local highways. And some would argue that all this investment eventually overextended the nation's coffers and left local authorities with a lasting legacy of expensive PFI investment debt. Others will, of course, argue that this focus on infrastructure was the driver for economic growth and is what took the nation forward and raised living standards for all. Well, debate that one. The reality is that today, hardly a new ministerial speech goes by without reference to infrastructure investment as the key to driving economic growth and kickstarting the transformation of UK living standards across the nation. And as Sir Keir Starmer puts it in his pre-election manifesto, we are presented with, and I quote, an opportunity to begin the work of national renewal, a rebuilding of our country so that it once again serves the interests of working people. To create, he adds, a new Britain where wealth is created in every community, where the golden opportunity of clean British power is harnessed for lower bills, and where your town centre has been revitalised and everyone feels safe to walk the streets. Okay, so that was the ambition. What about the reality of delivery when the rubber hits the road? Well, the overriding sentiment from industry folk that I've spoken to is one of excitement over the prospect of change and refocus, and coupled with the absolute certainty that this new government has to turn the ambition into delivery with the certainty and consistency of policy and actual support that the supply chain has been for too long crying out for. Well, it's a tough brief given the perilous state of the public finances. So why don't we take a quick look at 6 key issues that jump out to me as interesting factors that might actually shape the next 5 to 10 years of infrastructure investment and try perhaps to get a sense of where we might be heading. So let's start with number 1. When it comes to infrastructure investment, it's clear that the National Infrastructure Commission has transformed the nation's ability to identify and prioritise a need. Yet it's also long been said that it needs the statutory power and teeth to actually hold government's feet to the fire and accelerate policy and decision making. Good news, therefore, that we're already starting to see activity to create this so-called National Infrastructure Service Transformational Authority, talked about by Labour, bringing together the National Infrastructure Commission with the Cabinet Office-backed Infrastructure and Projects Authority, which should set strategic infrastructure priorities and oversee the design, scope and delivery of projects. And legislation to support such an organisation is set to be in the King's Speech. The Major Projects Association has long been calling for and perhaps even seeded such an idea in the minds of the opposition, and talked about the need for a national delivery agency to help drive forward project delivery and supplement the National Infrastructure Commission's strategy oversight role. So good news there. And of course, a new industrial strategy is also promised, which should provide another form of strategic structure to investment and support for the supply chain by ending short-term economic policy making and helping to drive economic growth across all regions of the country, provided that the long called for policy certainty and planning consistency, those two words again, needed to engage and drive the supply chain is put into practice. So exciting times ahead there, and challenging ones of course, as a balance is struck between maintaining the independence of the National Infrastructure Commission and the need to drive forward delivery with the statutory powers and central government oomph. So on to the second point, and perhaps which builds on the first, is the desire by the new administration to finally tackle the long-standing problem of outdated planning legislation, which for too long, and often for all the right reasons, has stood in the way of critical infrastructure delivery in the UK. As such, the government now talks about immediately updating the national policy planning framework and restoring mandatory housing targets while creating a raft of new partnerships with local leaders and communities to accelerate regeneration projects and a series of new communities across England. Legislation is expected to accelerate the delivery of 1.5 million new homes promised over the next Parliament, the energy and power transmission projects that we are crying out for, and also might ease the path for crucial transport corridors, which of course has long been sought. And that will mean pushing planning decision making down to a local level with a rake of new local growth plans to enable towns and cities to grasp the tools needed to pursue growth, create jobs and improve living standards, all of which again must be very good things. Which brings me to my third interesting development underlining this new focus on local democracy, which is to scrap the Boris Johnson-inspired levelling up mantra in place of a return to a focus on local government, both in the name of Angela Rayner's new department. She's now Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, but also in ideology. The reality is that the phrase levelling up has lost its true meaning and for too long been used as a symbolic carrot which was there to give hope to desperately underfunded regions, while at the same time also used as a stick to beat in particular the Labour Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Hugely toxic and totally pointless in practice. So this new focus on local government, combined with the acceleration of local democracy and truly devolved fiscal powers through new regional mayors, should be a really hopeful and really exciting prospect for not just providing the kind of infrastructure seen as the norm in London, but actually providing stuff which is better. There's a challenge. Then we have number 4 on my list, Great British Energy, legislation for which is set to be included in this first King's Speech. Now, this publicly owned clean power company promises to work in partnership with energy companies, with local authorities and cooperatives to drive delivery of new onshore wind, solar and hydropower projects. That should secure the UK's journey to net zero emissions while also cutting bills and boosting our energy security. And of course, a windfall tax on oil and gas firms will underpin the business, which Labour hopes will see the development of new technologies and underpin the vast investment required to decarbonise our energy supply. Alongside this effort is a promise to what's described as rewire Britain, to update the transmission network and remove the obstacles to the deployment of cheap, clean power generation. Much needed, of course, more particularly given the scandalous scale of so-called constraints payments currently being paid to renewable generators not to produce power. And of course, we will hopefully finally also see investment to help retrofit our building stock with a warm homes plan, offering grants and loans to support investment in insulation and other domestic energy improvements. Huge opportunities there for sure, and you could say we've seen them all before, but maybe this time we'll see them in reality. Number 5, and next up for me, is transport, and the headline grabber is the appointment of rail transport guru and London bus owner Lord Peter Hendy of Richmond Hill as Minister for Rail, who will oversee the much discussed and always controversial overhaul of Britain's railways. The plan is to drive forward with Great British Railways to deliver a unified system that focuses on reliable, affordable, high quality and efficient services, putting passengers at the heart of the services and bringing service back into public ownership as franchises expire. Huge challenges ahead here, with of course the spectre of the past British Rail nationalised rail operation days always hanging large over any plans, but the most recent franchises that were handed back post-COVID seem to be delivering for passengers, so let's see. Meanwhile, Labour promises a much anticipated long-term strategy for transport set to modernise transport infrastructure to bring forward long-promised road upgrade projects and investment to renew local roads and repair decades of underfunding and of course the potholes that this has created. And that means a new focus on long-promised transformation of northern rail routes, decisions on projects such as the Lower Thames Crossing and numerous other vital proposals to move bottlenecks across the national road network. And maybe we'll even see a plan to bring HS2 trains into London. Well, we'll see about that one. Number 6, and finally, for me, it's worth pointing out that making all of this aspiration a reality comes down to aligning the public funding and private sector investment required. And to that end, the plan to establish a national wealth fund must be welcomed, capitalised with £7.3 billion over the course of the next Parliament. The stated aim is to attract £3 of private investment for every £1 of public investment, with £1.8 billion allocated to upgrade ports, £1.5 billion to accelerate new gigafactories and kickstart EV production, £2.5 billion to support the steel industry, £1 billion to accelerate the deployment of carbon capture, and £500 million to support green hydrogen production. All very exciting propositions for which it will be interesting to see develop, and of course to see how the markets react to such pump priming, because as usual, all private sector investment decisions rely on those two words again, confidence and consistency. So we will see. So there's my 6 issues for starters. Many others are out there, I'm sure, that I've missed, and I'm thinking, for example, big decisions over water regulation, over industrial decarbonisation, and of course radical reform required in the skills and training of the UK to ensure that the right talent is finding its way into the infrastructure sector. All issues that I hope we'll have time to talk through with guests on the Infrastructure Podcast going forward. But enough for now from me. So thanks for joining me in this quick journey as we continue to identify and shed some light on the big issues and challenges facing the sector and of course facing the new government. I hope you found it useful in explaining how we will be transforming the nation's infrastructure and driving a new era of change into every aspect of our lives. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. Thanks again for joining me. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.